Hey guys, last night was an exciting night. We began our midweek program for Rock Youth Youth Ministries, and so I'm excited that we've begun the topic and discussion of what a true disciple is. And so we actually see that in our theme verse that we're going to be studying for the next 3 months till November, and we see that in John 13:35. In John 13:35, we see that it says, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." John 13:35. And so I gave you guys out these bookmarks, as well as you can find the same reading plan in our app. If you just go to any app store and search the Rock Church Fenton, download that app, as well as on our social media, Fenton Rock Youth, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find that. But we will be reading around the topic of loving one another, and then we'll be discussing that. And so whether you're a parent, student, kid, or you are a leader that will be meeting with them on Wednesday nights, we're going to be reading around the topic of loving one another, and then studying and talking about questions that have to do with that. And so we started with our theme verse, talking from John 13:35 to love one another, and then we defined what love is. And we see that in actually Ephesians 5, where it says we are to nourish and cherish, or we are to feed and protect and care for one another. That's what it means to love one another. So people will know we are his disciples if we nourish or cherish or protect and care and feed others with our lives, not tear down and backbite and hurt and have bitterness towards them. And so for the next 3 months, we're going to be learning what it is to love one another. And so starting today, for this next 7 days, our reading plan is going to be around the topic of putting others' needs before our own. And so for the next 7 days, you're going to read examples from Jesus himself, teachings from Jesus himself, an example of Ruth living out that same lifestyle of putting others' needs before her own, and then the opposite, when Judas puts his needs before others and what happens and how that affects his life. And so whether you're a parent, a student, or a leader, I hope that you'll be reading with us this week. And as you read, I want you to ask yourself some questions. I want you to ask yourself, who is it that Jesus or Ruth are putting their needs before their own? And so who is it that they are taking and putting their needs before their own needs? And then ask yourself, who's that in your own life? Whose needs do you need to begin to put before your own needs? And then, what does God want you to do in response to that? What is your need to do in that, with that person? Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a coworker, and maybe it's an enemy. Maybe it's somebody in your life that you just don't like, and God has desired that you would put their needs before your own. Because as we looked in 1 John last night, we saw the fact, we can just turn there for a second. In 1 John 4, it says, "If someone says, 'I love God,' but hates his fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love a God whom we cannot see?" And so if we call ourselves a believer, we are to love others. And so I hope that you'll join us this week, and you'll start today reading the Bible reading plan around the topic of love, putting others' needs before your own. And then parents and students, throughout the week, finding times where you guys can come together and you can discuss what God is teaching you, discuss what God is showing you, and maybe even pick a Bible verse from the reading that you two, parents and students, can come together and memorize. That means something to you, that's important to you, that God is speaking to you. And then next Wednesday, I hope that all of you Rock Youth students will come back. The leaders will have been reading all week alongside of you, and come ready to discuss those questions we talked about last night, about how did you feed your soul this week? What did you read? What is God teaching you? What does God want you to do in response to what he's teaching you? The second question is, how did you feed your flesh? How did you mess up this week? How did you sin? How did you struggle with temptation this week? And then the final question, how did you feed others? How did you take what God has shown you and is teaching you and shown and teach others through that? Maybe it's to encourage them in their faith, or maybe it's to find someone who needs Jesus, who's lost, that you can share the gospel with. And so I hope that you will join us this next Wednesday, and that you'll join us starting today with the reading plan for the next 7 days. I'm excited to see what God is going to teach us about loving one another.